Yeah, just maybe a couple of minutes, 1 second or so. Great. So I think we are on. Um, Thank you, Alexander, for joining the call. I just wanted to let everyone know that Alexander Leicht is the Chief Section of Education for Sustainable Development Division for Peace and Sustainable Development Education Sector, UNESCO. And you're joining from Paris, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes. Glad to
So
be here.
how are things in Paris? I hope getting back to normal, or is it
Uh,
still the same?
Yeah, yeah, a little bit more normal. I mean, like we really had a quite a tough lockdown basically until a week ago. But now from this week, things have eased a little bit. People heading out can move a bit more freely. But like everywhere across the world, everyone is nervous now, of course, about sort of the question if will the curve go back up or will it stay stable. But sort of daily life is getting a little bit easier.
A little bit easier. We are just living, in a life of experimentation. I feel that
Yeah.
every day is a new story and we don't know what we are heading into. And I just hope and pray that, we survive this pandemic and all of us can recover from it very soon. So
Yeah.
thank you for actually joining this session, Alexander. Really appreciate it. I know it is difficult time, but I feel that this is also the right time to discuss education and see how we can move ahead and how do we re-envision, things. So I have a set of very difficult questions for you, since you are the
Right.
best person to answer answer
Right. Right.
so these
Right.
questions. But before I go on to my questions, I want to give chance to our eco ambassadors. So basically, we run this program, eco ambassadors program, where we focus on science based education, but also using it for real life applications
Mhm.
to, basically it's tips on how do you lead life that's more sustainable, how do you practice things and not just keep it in your books. So I'm happy to welcome Janani Shivkumar. She's one of our eco ambassadors. She is a sophomore at Metuchen High School in New Jersey and is passionate about climate justice advocate, is an advocate, and is the founder of Girls Play Global, which is a non-profit initiative to empower girls in rural parts of India through sports. Very, very impressive. And she's also a United Nations Youth on SDGs advocate and an active international speaker to raise awareness for global issues like gender equality and climate change. Welcome, Janini. I know you are doing your online classes, so I don't want you to miss a lot of your school time. And I know you've really prepared well in terms of your questions that you want to ask Mr. Light. So can you please go ahead and ask your questions?
Yeah, of course. So thank you for this opportunity, first of all. I'm super excited to be able to ask my questions. So the first question is just, since animal agriculture plays a major role in climate change, how can we address the harmful effects caused by it?
Mm. Thanks a lot for joining and for the question and starting right with a challenging question at the beginning. I think here, I mean, at least, I mean, like from my perspective or from our perspective, really, one of the responses is education and sensitizing people to the impact on carbon emissions that animal agriculture has, and of course encouraging them through education at different levels to be first more aware of the whole issue, and then of course also adapt everyone's daily practices really, and that can be done by it's a bit sort of the way we generally work also with regard to other topics, not only in our agriculture, but with regard to other topics at all level of the school system, but also not only inside, but also outside the school system, just by raising people's awareness really, and then also giving them the right tools to become active, to change their daily lifestyles.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And my next question was just, how can we influence policymaking at a young age, so as youth, to ensure that we can demand change and take action in the climate justice movement?
I think there's from my perspective, like from UNESCO's perspective, but also from my personal perspective, I think there's there's various different entry points. But first of all, I just wanted to in a way pay tribute to all the pressure that is coming from young people, because I'm sure we all agree that the world is not moving quickly enough really towards addressing climate change. So I think the way young people really called for action over the last 18 months or 2 years has really made a huge difference. And I can really also see it in my really daily work, really how different the situation has become. So I think one important avenue really to raise your voice is the way you have been doing it, really, through street protests, through sort of mobilizing civil society to exert pressure really on politicians, to be more bold and to be more courageous. But then also, of course, there's a responsibility with the political process itself, and then also with the United Nations, among others, to provide these platforms to young people and to make sure that they have a chance to directly speak to policymakers and hold them to account. And I think we've also seen over the last maybe 1 or 2 years that I think sort of these official political processes have also become more open to listening to young people. When I look at, for example, the last climate change conference, COP25 in Madrid, where we from UNESCO also participated. Compared to previous COPs, the voice of young people was much more visible and much more present there. So I think it's going in the right direction, but I think a lot more needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janani, and thank you, Alexander, for those questions. I think it was important for us to raise the issues that the youth is bringing up, much more important than what I'm going to ask. But of course, I have a lot of dilemmas in my head currently with all this going on and reimagining things and how will we recover from this pandemic. So Jani, thank you. You can stay on, or I'll post you the link for this session. And thank you for asking your brave questions, and thank you for being on the call. Alexander, for you, my question is regarding a workshop that we did on the 29th of April on SDG 4.7 and its links to climate change. So just wanted to get your opinion on how does SDG 4.7 lend itself to climate action, or does it not? And or are we like overstretching our limits for SDG 4 to be linking to climate change, or should we just look at the climate change, environment related SDG on its own?
Right. No, so I think thanks very much. It goes really straight to the heart of the matter. I think the question, and in a way, from my perspective, there's a kind of glass half full and a glass half empty answer to it. I think. I mean, to start with the more like optimistic answer or assessment, I think to have SDG 4.7 now, and for the first time ever really as part of the global education agenda, not only education agenda, but sustainability agenda, really an emphasis on the relevant education content that is needed to generate action for sustainable development. I think that is really a very big achievement, and I think we should acknowledge that. In the past, of course, the focus of the international education agenda was very much on providing access to education, and that of course remains very, very relevant with so many kids out of school. But it's of course only the first step to provide access to education. And then of course we had another step with regard to emphasizing the quality of education, sort of well-trained teachers, for example, good school facilities, etc. But that also is only a further step. And I think we have done an important third step now with Target 4.7 and with the SDGs to really emphasize on the relevant education content. And that is really new, and that provides a very strong mandate, I think, for our work also to integrate climate action into education. Now, of course, it is an important step. It is an important mandate. but it's of course not enough yet. I mean, I think we all know, and we cannot be naive to think that one target among so many other targets really sort of changes sort of the dynamics of education. So I think it's a longer process, but it's a very, very important first step to have the treaty as part of the education agenda.
Mm-hmm. The way it is worded, SDG 4.7, it seems more, someone, gave me this reference, it's got stuck in my head that it's more poetry and some mathematics.
Yes.
Because
yes.
it is like long, it includes everything which, involves global citizenship, peace, education, everything that needs to be fitting in with no direct indicator to environment related or action, climate action related work. And then we rely on student, protests and everything to be there. How do we work with this 4.7 to ensure that there is something on action, something on climate action that is specifically given in schools, that is a mandate that everyone needs to follow? So I don't know if you have any concrete suggestions on, because I want to use this discussion to see how I want to guide my own work to the Center for Sustainable Development. And also Christina and I did this workshop on on the 29th of April, and we have come up with a roadmap. We don't want it to be like another framework which no one really follows. It has to be implemented, and it has to come up from grassroots levels to make sure that we link education and climate change. But I feel that it will just be another framework that either no one will follow, or it is too ambitious that people can't follow given the reality of the ground. And we know there are a lot of challenges with teacher shortages, a lot of challenges with many things. So do you see such a roadmap to have any kind of potential? Are we wasting our time, or there is something to it, and there will be more people joining our movement who want to link education and climate change?
Yeah, my feeling is that, of course, I mean, I would be the first one to say that a lot more needs to be done, and we've only really just started, reorienting education and education systems. But I think going back to the answer to the first question, at least it's a good entry point. And of course, climate is not explicitly referenced in Target 4.7, and we have all these many different concepts and approaches sort of thrown in. But I think we have to also look through these different words, basically, to the substance of 4.7. And that really seems to me to be about relevant education content. And I think for us, when we do our interpretation work of this target, the important step is to not stay at the knowledge and awareness level, but really sort of talk about action. And of course, that word is not explicitly there, but that would be, in a way, all of us together. Sort of intergovernmental organizations, governments themselves, but then of course also civil society, which exerts the relevant pressure to make that point that we cannot stay at the level of knowledge and skills as it is worded in the target, but that we need to move towards that.
Thank you, Alexander. My next question is regarding the education system. So if you try to operationalize SDG 4.7, where do you see is a good entry point? You were discussing entry point, SDG 4.7. Is it a good entry point at the local level, like communities, or is it a good level at the district level, or maybe cities and at the national level?
Yeah. I think there are various entry points, and like at UNESCO, with our EST program, we have identified 5 what we call priority action areas. That is sort of the policy level that provides that is maybe very slow to move very often, but that provides the relevant supportive environment, and also of course the funding. The level of the education institution. Not only schools, but also universities, the level of teachers, trainers, facilitators, that then young people and groups of young people, civil society groups of young people, and then the local level in the sense of local administration, local government. So these 5 we have identified as the important entry points. I think the quickest action, because I think you're also asking about that, the quickest action, I think my assessment is, and from my observation, is at the school level and at the local community level. I think those is where you can most quickly see really, really great work coming and being generated. And I think the big task that we also in a way have in our translation work is from the ground up into policies, really, to make sure that this is scaled up into policies. The policies support sort of a spreading out of these individual good practices into the whole system, because of course that remains one of the big challenges. We have huge amounts of very, very good work that we can observe, but that doesn't mean, you know, that it's implemented across the board throughout the country or throughout a variety of
Yeah, I think you are absolutely correct in labeling this as like, you know, a grassroots movement. Just to give you an example, I live in Melbourne, New Jersey, and recently our township passed this bill of, having no plastic, single-use plastic at the businesses. And there are so many different entities who are working on it. There is a school's green committee, which consists of parents who are focusing on educating the children, educating the parental group. Then we have, environmental commission that the township has, and there are all these other citizens, people like us who have formed WhatsApp group and are really standing in front of CVS pharmacy, standing in front of ShopRites, giving out our reusable cloth bags to educate people. So it may not be written or it may not really be highlighted at the national or even state level policy issues, but I feel that there are so many things happening at the local domestic level, and maybe a researcher side of me wants to have a documentation of all these things and case studies to be developed, which are very motivational and which are very connected to people's lives and connected to community base. So I think it's a perfect way to start a movement which is grounds up with youth as there. And I'll definitely look up the 5 priority action that you have spoken about, and maybe you can send us the links also, and we can post it out to our various eco ambassadors. My next question is regarding students and the learning levels. It was a general question before COVID-19 happened, and now I think it has even worsened, because now students will go back hoping it will be in the fall around the world, and the learning levels would have dipped further with little support from the schools. And given that technology has been challenging in most places, given this learning level challenges, do you think that the ESD community has a chance of infusing more material about climate change into the curriculum? Any suggestions, or maybe you are already working on documentation or research papers that can give us some guidelines on how we can still use this ESD material into curriculums and also improve learning levels?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a very, very key question. I think for all our work with ministries and with other stakeholders. First, before responding more in detail, I want to acknowledge that this is really a key challenge, because I think the ambition of ESD is very transformational. The ambition of ESD is really to allow everyone to question everything that they're doing in their daily lives, but also in their lives as citizens, as political citizens, and then to do things differently. So that's a very, very big ambition, of course, and often we fall short of this ambition in our implementation work. But we need to acknowledge the ambition is very, very big, and that also makes it very difficult then to sort of implement it to 100%, because the priorities in the education sector are very often very different. It starts with simple knowledge and basic skills. So I think, but then we cannot, of course, stop and say that we cannot do ESD, because first the basic skills need to be there. I think we need both. I mean, there's no use in having extremely well educated and well trained people who destroy the planet. So basically, I think we have to insist that both need to go together. Basic skills, workplace skills, but then also the skills that are needed for a greener planet. And then more specifically in response to your question, I think it is possible to and I think there's good work going on in that regard, maybe not visible enough. It is possible also to, of course, acquire basic skills and meet sort of normal education quality ambitions through work that is relates to the environment. We a few years ago we published an ESD source book where we tried to show sort of how ESD can be infused into different subject areas and how it can contribute to the learning achievements of those subject areas. And more recently, we try to spell out the ESD learning objectives for each one of the 17 SDGs. And among those, and some of these learning objectives are of course very ambitious and very transformational, but some of them are also just much more simple. So you can learn mathematics through understanding climate change, or you can sort of learn to read and write by through sort of learning about the green economy. So I think there is a clear linkage that you can make, and that we have started to try to make. But I do want to acknowledge that it is a very, very big challenge, and also there's often a disconnect between sort of the official development priorities that channel the funding into the education sector, and our more kind of really transformational approach for sustainable development.
I think I should talk to you more often, because I think you give me the optimism that I need to hear. And I think I need to go back and see all the documents that you are, looking at. One thing that I also wanted to highlight is that materials are not maybe disseminated till the school level. So it is up to us, citizens living in all these, different communities, if we can use the materials that you have highlighted and worked on into schools and give teachers the resources. That is another way of acting as like a with doing citizen engagement. That probably will be helpful in terms of making sure that schools are on board, and parents here have a lot of through the parental associations and other things, they can definitely do much more with the schools. So thank you for actually highlighting all these resources, which I will definitely look up and share with our network. My next question is regarding UN's 2030 framework on ESD. What makes this framework different from the ESD predecessors, and also how can we help countries to achieve SDG 4.7 through this particular framework?
Okay, so about this new framework that was just approved at the end of last year, and that we were supposed to launch at the big world conference just in a couple of days actually, but we had to, like all other conferences, we had to postpone this one particularly specifically to May next year, when we will organize this big world conference hosted by Germany. Where we will sort of kick off the ESD for 2030 framework. What's new with this framework that we have developed through a long consultation process with all member states, but also with a lot of civil society stakeholders. What's new is that we emphasize much more strongly than before the aspect of individual and societal transformation. I think in the past, the emphasis of ESD, of environmental education and related approaches, has been more on the individual level, sort of behavior changes, basically sustainable consumption, etc. Maybe the skills that you need to learn to contribute to a green economy, but the focus was very often on the individual, and that remains that continues to be a very, very important focus. But equally important are the big structural questions. And we can, when we as individuals behave and live sustainably, it's very difficult to do that within an economic system that is basically, wasting natural resources. So I think we always at the same time also have to ask these questions, and then we need to empower people through education ask these questions and then also to take action as citizens, as political actors also basically. So that's one of the things that we integrate very clearly in this new framework, much more explicitly than in the past. So that I would claim is a really new element here. Another new element, of course, is now the linkage to the 17 SDGs, where we have the opportunity really to very systematically analyze and then also act upon the education content that is relevant for each one of the 17 SDGs. I think that's also, at least sort of from a UN organization perspective, a very, very good opportunity, because it fully integrates ESD work into the wider sustainable development agenda and doesn't have it disconnected by situating it only in the education sector. So that's more on the kind of in terms of like the objectives and the ambitions of this new framework. When it comes to the implementation, we are focusing much more also than in the past on the country level. So we will encourage, once it is properly launched, we will encourage really country initiatives on ESD for 2030, and these country initiatives, among various components, they will have to be interministerial and intersectorial. So we don't want them to be only in the education sector or only with the Ministry of Environment, but they need to bring together the different sectors that are in charge of the SDGs. It's really when we will continue with our global networking and advocacy work that we have done in the past as well. But we will focus much more on really supporting countries directly on the ground to establish these initiatives. So that's also learning from our past work and our past framework.
Thank you so much, Alexander. My next question is, we always want to look at, inspirational stories and case studies. So in your, I know you must have compiled a lot of these inspirational stories. So I just wanted to ask if there are any scalable and replicable case studies or initiatives that you've seen that can be scaled up, on the climate action side, and also what are your recommendations to keep these programs not just like one-time projects, funding runs out and then you don't hear back from them? Is there any way of doing a year-round initiative, lessons learned, sharing with other countries and so on and so forth?
Yeah. I think one more recent example, more from sort of also UNESCO's work, is I would like to mention is a project we did with some extra budgetary funding we received from the Japanese government, which has been always a very strong ESD promoter, to use with our UNESCO schools network. We have a big network of I think now 11,000 schools that are associated with UNESCO. And we picked a few pilot schools to implement a whole school approach to address climate change, to really look at the whole school community, education content, teaching and learning styles, but also facility management, and then the way sort of the governance in the school is organized. And we try to align that through providing concrete guidance documents, but then also providing sort of capacity building for the school community. We try to align all these different school components with sustainable development, and in particular, in this case, with climate action, really. We've started with, in 25 countries, with around 250 schools. And that led to a lot of, there's also a nice video that summarizes that project that I can share, that led to a lot of very, very concrete on-the-ground success stories, where we have a lot of evidence that really the learning and teaching practice of students and teachers and of school heads really changed through this project. So that's really sort of my top example that I would mention in response to your question. Now, of course, it worked very well and it has been evaluated very positively, etc. But of course, it's a project that was only carried out in a few schools, 250 from a network of 11,000. And that leads to the second part to your question. So the big challenge, of course, is how to scale that up to the whole network. Of course, one question is a funding question, and we are at the moment mobilizing funding to roll this out to the whole network. But some of the work can also be done with not too much funding, really. I think some can be done within existing school structures, and it just requires a bit of, I don't know, boldness and political will on the part of the school to implement that, set up a kind of group of students, of teachers, of school administration to drive such a process within a school. But the problem or the challenge, of course, remains. How can these individual projects be sort of translated into projects that are done basically everywhere, and that are not then projects anymore, but really just everyone's learning reality. And here I see a big kind of role for organizations like ours, who can provide the platform for these individual projects to show them to the policymakers, who then also have the power over the funding, and to convince them of them. And that's one of the contributions we also want to make through this new ESD for 2030 program, that we want to really have a global network with recurring meetings, where we want to provide this opportunity to showcase on a regular basis this good practice that is done on the ground to those who have the authority, the power, the leverage to sort of spread this out further.
Thank you, Alexander. My last question is, I think you also touched about on it a little bit earlier, on UNESCO's role in pushing education systems around the world for bolder and more radical and transformative education for climate change. You mentioned advocacy, then having this pilot, and then translating it into a much larger network. Are there any other, with your role at UNESCO, do you see that UNESCO should be playing such a role, or are there any gaps that you see right now which are stopping your process?
Mm-hmm. I think thanks for that question. Of course, I think one of the key sort of features we can bring to the whole process is that we work with all ministries of education across the world directly. So they are basically our direct counterpart. So we have a very direct access to the policy level, and to sort of build capacities of policymakers, and also to advocacy vis-a-vis policymakers. So I think that's one of our key contributions that we can bring when it comes to sort of action on the ground. Sometimes, of course, intergovernmental organizations move, it's just in their nature, move more slowly, and civil society organizations can move more quickly. But I think when it comes to this kind of advocacy at the policy level, that's one of the key contributions that we can make. And the second thought that I wanted to share is that UNESCO really has traditionally, and we have sort of even strengthened that over the last couple of years, I think, really stood for this humanistic, holistic view of education. So we really promote education that develops the whole person, allows the person as a whole to find fulfillment, in a way, to say it like that, but also, of course, to find a good professional life, but then also contribute to their societies and the values of a kind of global society. So I think it's this holistic, humanistic vision that we are trying to promote, that provides a good kind of umbrella over this work to create climate action. So I think that's another kind of contribution I think we can.
Great, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Alexander. I think it was very inspirational, and it has given me, and I'm sure other people who are watching it, a sense of direction of where things need to go, what is the process that UNESCO is following, what are the parameters that you are taking into consideration. And I'm hoping that we can bug you a little bit more later on, and then by email, and ask you all the questions that we have in terms of our work at the Center for Sustainable Development, and our collaboration with Brookings through Christina, to see how we can follow this roadmap and take guidance from you to see what we can implement on the ground, and maybe hopefully develop some great case studies that can be highlighted in some of the reports. And so a lot needs to be done, as you said, and I'm hoping to take your lead and hoping to see how we can follow your leadership. And so please definitely keep us in your thoughts and share the documents that may be coming up, so that we can utilize the documents in our own collective. There's a group of 400 people who are joined in our network, and happy to share all the resources with them. And they are vibrant lot with, like all climate activists, so I'm sure you'll get a lot of response and feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and for all these very, very interesting and challenging questions, and also for all the work that you are doing. It's been a real pleasure contributing.
Thank you, Alexander.